Well, I read an article this morning on the BBC News website which brought back memories from childhood. As a family, we often went on camping holidays in Derbyshire, just a couple of hours' drive from our home in the West Midlands. On one of those holidays, I remember visiting the village of Ireham, sometimes known as the Plague Village. You may have heard of it. The history is that a plague arrived in a bundle of cloth from London in 1665. A tailor's assistant, George Vicar, was said to have opened the bale and hung the cloth in front of the hearth to dry. In doing so, he unwittingly released the disease-ridden fleas contained in the parcel, and he himself became the first of the plague's victims within the village of Ireham. Well, the disease spread quickly through the community, and in just 4 months, 42 villagers died. By the spring of the following year, many people were on the verge of fleeing their homes and their livelihoods in order to save themselves. And it was at that point that the newly appointed rector, William Mompesson, stepped in. He believed it was his duty to prevent the plague spreading to the nearby towns of Sheffield and Bakewell, and he decided that the village must be quarantined. Well, trying to persuade the parishioners to sacrifice their lives was extremely difficult, almost impossible, in fact. Burials in the churchyard had already been banned, with open-air services taking place a short distance away. At those services, people had to stand apart from each other to avoid spreading the infection. And now, on top of that, the villagers were being asked to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to save the lives of others. Well, to achieve his goal, Mompesson hatched a plan with the Earl of Devonshire, living nearby at Chatsworth House. If the villagers agreed to be quarantined, the Earl would send food and supplies to the community in Ireham. Well, eventually, after much discussion and prayer, the villagers agreed. The outcome was that 260 villagers died, with each one being listed as a plague victim in the parish registers. That number represented 75% of the population of the village, a huge sacrifice by one small community on behalf of the wider world. Well, I remember as a child being very moved by that story as we visited Ireham Church one summer. But never would I have imagined that we might be called to do something similar in our times. The story has become a part of English history, and it stands as a symbol of selflessness, an example of self-sacrifice. It's also part of the bigger story of the Christian faith and Jesus' own selflessness and sacrifice on behalf of a world plagued by sin and suffering. As we live through these challenging times, it's good to remember the people of Ireham back in the 17th century and their sacrifice. It's good to remember too our Christian heritage as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And as we make sacrifices today for the greater good, let's remember that we're walking the way of the cross. We're sharing in the sufferings of Christ.